Hello, in this tutorial I'm going to show you a couple of things. First, how to get rid of this look that, all the edges around the cylinder look very bulky. That's the first thing, to smooth edges and to harden edges. And the second thing would be how to duplicate a mesh using Duplicate Special and get the mirror version of it. Like, for example, if you have a hand like this, and imagine this is the body of my character. It's so bulky and ugly, ignore that. So if you want to get the other hand using the one that you just created, how to go about it, okay? We know the basics of it. I showed you how to use Duplicate Special, but this is specifically for how to mirror based on the center of the project or center of your object, okay? So first, let's start with the look that I get here for this edges that are showing as really like angled, right? They are not showing as smooth. You can see that if I create like a cylinder and put it next to this, just rotate it. You can see the difference, right? I'm gonna turn on this wireframe unshaded preview here. I'm gonna click on it so you can see what is the geometry that I have here. So I created a cube and rounded it up using the get a sphere out of a cube method, okay? And just selected the faces, half of the faces, and just moved them away. That's how I get this geometry, right? But you can see that as I did that, the edges are showing as like really angled and they're not as smooth, okay? So there's a way in Maya to tell Maya, okay, don't show me a preview that is so bulky, okay? Make these edges smooth. But we're not changing the mesh, right? We're just changing how Maya is showing it to us, right? So to do that, you need to select those edges that are showing like this, like not smooth, okay? Or wherever in your model that you want the edges to look smooth, right? You can go to edge mode and select all those edges, right? These are the edges that I want to smooth. And you do shift right click, and you can see here that it says soften harden edges, right? So I'm just going to go in and say soften edges. And I can see the difference here, right? It took care of the hard edges here. Also, I can do the same thing with this sphere that I created. The subdivision for the sphere by default is 20. I just set it to be 10 and now it looks bulky. Let's see how soften edges can take care of that. So I'm going to go to edges, select everything, and do shift right click, soften harden edges, and then soften edges. Well, that's way better. And now if I hit 3 on my keyboard, I can see that it's showing as a smooth. Okay, that's good for this stage. Later at the final step, we're gonna go back and smooth everything that we want. But for now, we're gonna hold on to this, right? Okay, I'm gonna do the same for this. All the edges that are showing as bulky, I'm gonna do shift right click and then soften edges. Again, for this mesh, I'm going to soften everything. I'm going to select all the edges. I guess if I hit G, it's going to do it because my previous tool was soften edges. Yes, it does. Okay. So it looks good. Okay, good for now. And yeah, that looks good. Okay. So now let's see how we can mirror this hand on the other side, okay? So first thing, I want to put this body of the character that is on the way of building in a display layer so it's out of the way. I can set it to be like showing me the wireframe of it, not the whole thing. Okay, I'm going to select this, click on this new layer, set it to T. So it's showing me this, okay? So it's a good start. So to use Duplicate Special, So duplicate special, we learned that we can use that to mirror objects, right? I can see here that I need to be mirroring based on like the center of the project, right? Based on the YZ plane. As I can look at here, my object is in the x-axis, and I need to rotate it in the regarding the YZ axis. So the first thing to do for duplicate special to work correctly is that you need to match the pivot to the center, to the axis that you want to be, you know, your object to be mirrored based off of. Okay, so here, because you know, duplicate special is going to look at the pivot point, right? For example, if here I do duplicate special, let's see what it does. I'm going to go to edit, duplicate special to its option. I'm gonna change the setting to default so your setting matches mine. Reset setting. Okay. So here I want to do duplicate special. So I'm gonna put -1 for x-axis and say apply. As you can see, it created this new object, and it's exactly like this one. It is only mirrored based on the pivot point of the object that I selected, right? If I click on this object, the pivot point is here. If I select this object, the pivot point is in here. Okay, so the pivot point is the point that a duplicate special tool considers when it wants to mirror objects, right? It sets the two objects in such a way that their pivot point matches. Okay, so the pivot point is important. So now I'm going to delete this because that's not where I want the hand to be created. I want the hand to be created right at the other side. Okay, so if your object is like the body of the object is symmetrical, you can use this method. So what I do is that I'm going to put the pivot point for all of these objects because I want all of them to be mirrored. I put the pivot point of all of these objects exactly on this line, okay? Because I know if I put the pivot point in here and I do duplicate special, everything is going to be mirrored based on the pivot point. So it's going to be exactly the same distance on the other side, and I'm going to get you know, hand on the other side, right? So I'm going to do this. So in the previous video, I showed you how to match pivot point to like the center of the project. It's pretty much the same thing. So what I do, one of the ways to do it actually, is I can create a locator, and this will give me like something to measure the center of the project, or to be exactly at this line, because I know when Maya creates thing, it puts them right at the center. Okay. So I can do duplicate special using like putting the pivot point here, but just to be like a little bit more easy to comprehend this, I'm just gonna put it here. Okay, it doesn't matter, as long as it's on this line, it's gonna do the mirror correctly on the other side, right? So I'm just gonna put it here. And now what I need to do is that I need to set the pivot point for all of these objects to be here, right? So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to select all these objects and then select this, shift select this locator so that I can see that, and make sure you're in like move, or probably move would be better because it's going to show you where the pivot point is. Okay, make sure you're in the move mode, move tool, sorry. So now when you select everything, you need to select everything and then shift select the locator, and now you can see that, okay, this is where I can put the pivot point, right? So once you did that, you go to modify and say in the match transformation, underneath modify match transformation, you say match pivot, but you make sure that the pivot point that you see in your viewport is the one that you wanted all the objects to be set at. That's why we select the locator last, right? So I'm gonna say match pivot, And as you can see, all the pivots of these objects are now set here, right? So everything is now ready for me to use the duplicate special, right? So I'm just going to select all these objects and hit apply. As you can see, everything is now duplicated on the other side and it's mirrored, right? So now if you want to have the pivot point again at the center of these objects or at any other place, you can go in and select all these objects, and we are familiar with that, with the center pivot thing, right? You go to modify and do center pivot for all of them. So now center pivot, you know, the pivot point for each of them on the left is at the center. You can do the same for the right hand, right? You can just select all of them, say modify, center pivot, and the pivot for each of them is now set at the center. Now I have this shape mirrored, right? So that was that. I'm gonna create another tutorial for how to use half of a mesh to do duplicate special.